that working? Hello? It is? Wow. Really? It doesn't sound like my voice is very... It's... You can hear it? Okay. I can't even hear myself, so... Which is probably good. I see some books were handed out of the... How's that? Well, I just want to make sure everybody's got one. Last week we didn't have it. I'm on themes rather than specific parts. So if you go to my text here is 51 and 50. Let's see, 48, 49, and 50. So if you start, actually it looks at the start of 47 in this book here. Ru lai zui zi zai, the thus come one, most sovereign, kind of have that passage? Well, we're in the, I'm sorry, this is more than just one chapter that you have, right? Or do you just have one chapter? Chapter 9. Okay, so you have chapter 9, luminous awakening or light enlightenment. And then we're in this section, it's thus come one, most sovereign, transcends the world, relies on nothing. Okay. And then perfected merit and virtue. These are descriptions, Manjushri speaking, descriptions of a Buddha or a Tathagata, one who's fully realized the completeness of the perfection of the human, really. I think we should remind ourselves that this is what this is grounded in. This is not a description of a being who comes from outer space or from some heavenly realm. It's actually the result, the cultivated result of one's humanity. Gains a sovereign, relies on nothing, perfected merit and virtue. Then we go on, and without defilement of attachments, without thought and dependence, substance and nature, beyond measure, all those who see him or her speak and praise. The brilliance is pervasively clear, completely washed away the wearisome dust. Moving, he leaves it to extremes. I'm just repeating where we go to get a feel for what we've been doing. And then if one beholds the thus come one with body and mind apart from discriminations, then with regard to all dharmas, one forever transcends doubts and obstructions. So here's a theme I've been working on. There's a myriad themes within this one text, just within these verses here. We could talk about the sovereignty, we could talk about freedom from attachments and defilements, we could talk about how one goes from the human to this. But this idea of the funbie, and that's in the first line, Ruyo Jian Ru Lai, Shanxin Li Funbie. That funbie is where we didn't do this democratically. It's not like, what do you guys want to talk about? It's just like I decided. It's one time in my life I get to do a little sovereignty myself and just choose a topic here. Discriminations. Now it says, I think we can say the thus come one, thus come one, is, and this is interesting, they do body and mind. It means it's not just a mental, but it's also physical, it's an embodied state. And this would show up in demeanor, in deportment, in conduct, in how one lives in a daily way, and not simply what one thinks about. So it could be talking if one sees the thus come one, but it could also mean if you see the thus come one with your body and mind apart. The text is not clear here which one it is, and it may not matter really because the aim is to get to this state ourselves. Within all worlds and in all places. So this is, these first four verses carry on a theme from the last section of verses that all have to do with discrimination. I'm suggesting that the corrective to this is in this 5th verse here. Within all worlds and in all places, he turns the Dharma wheel, yet is without a nature, without turning, and thus the guiding master speaks expediently. So for the defilements, for the discriminations, for this confused state of mind, the 5th verse turns and goes into how we would rectify that, or how we would gain the original mind back. And then, of course, it goes on. But tonight, I wanted to finish this thing on discrimination. So, finish it. Finish talking about it. Finishing discrimination is another story, but finishing talking about it is maybe, and I hope I don't bore you tremendously tonight, but I want to make a connection between this ancient text and what it's talking about. It's basically talking about a psychological state of confusion. Sometimes it's called proliferation, and I'll go into that a little bit. But I also want to suggest tonight that there is a carryover correspondence for a technological proliferation. So we have the psychological proliferation that's going on here. Unchecked, as we unchecked or unabated or uncultivated, that psychological proliferation gives rise to actions. Those actions give rise to results. Those results become our karmic path. They become our destiny. So thoughts, ideas, desires turn into actions, turn into will, that turn into actions, that turn into the karma of our lives. So if we look at the proliferation here that's going on mentally, you can see that this is going to produce a world that we live in. It's not going to stay in the mind. It's going to go out into our actions. And so in a sense, this technological state I want to talk about tonight is a direct creation of this psychological state. And this is what it means that everything comes from this mind alone. So this discrimination is explaining a lot of our afflictions and the troubles are coming from an unchecked, unguarded, undisciplined mind. But we don't recognize it. So this funbia, I suggested the Sanskrit for this is probably closest to papancha. Remember we talked about this last week? Probably no one looked this up. Some of you have seen this term in your classes with the text, right? There's heads nodding. Did you remember? Yeah. And what does it mean? A little louder. It can be used for discrimination. It's got very subtle meanings. This is what I was suggesting about Buddhist psychology is very nuanced. Well, you got to drop your mask. Copy? Chopping. Oh, that's funbia, is to chop. It's to take. To chop, though, it's suggestive. It's very, yes, funbia has the knife radical in it. But it means to take not just a unified reality, but it's taking the level sameness of all phenomena. I've talked about this, a level equality of all dharmas. And then you chop them up into little bits and pieces. This I like, this I don't like, sight, sound, smells, taste, and you create a whole proliferated world of all these dongshi, all these things that you take to be the real. And actually what it is just a mental fabrication or construction. Chopping up is pretty good. You mince meat it, so to speak. But it's still the same old thing. So the derivation of papancha is not clear, but it has three ideas behind it, three nodes, if you will. One is to spread out and proliferate. That's one meaning of funbia. The other is an illusion or an obsession. So this is another level of here. It means, in the Chinese, it's sometimes panyuan is used. When we were translating Hanshan, prapancha was translated in Chinese as panyuan, to climb on conditions. So this is a very interesting, another meaning. It means you climb on conditions, you start to attach and obsess over an illusion. So, I mean, yeah, I'll just leave it there. And the third meaning is an obstacle or impediment. So you have proliferation and spreading. You have an obsession, and then you have an obstacle impediment. And in a sense, the obstacle impediment arises because of the proliferation and the obsessing. And ironically, when you proliferate, you're doing this. Master Waz says you're grasping everywhere, thinking to accumulate and acquire. That proliferation actually obstructs and impedes. It's the opposite of what you think. So the place where these three meanings converge in a very practical way is when you sit in meditation. So you sit like 45 minutes before the class tonight. You sit, quiet your mind, right? Papancha! Papancha comes in. You fold your legs, you close your eyes, and then Papancha hits. Bhikkhu Bodhi has a way of calling this out in a kind of eloquent way. He says it's the propensity of the worldling, the ordinary person's imagination, to erupt in an infusion of mental commentary that obscures the bare data of cognition. Shall I repeat that just if I didn't go in the first day? Propensity, the tendency of the people's imagination to erupt in an effusion. What's an effusion? Yeah, just, you used to take those things at holidays and it like a little, and you pull the string and pop and all this confetti and stuff comes out. That's prapancha. That's what happens when you sit in meditation. Om, pop. And then all effusion of mental commentary that obscures the bare data of cognition. So between seeing things really as they are comes this proliferation. In meditation, we see it. Okay, this is one of the benefits. You're saying, oh gosh, when I cross my legs and sit in meditation, I'm not calm and still. I don't enter nirvana. Papancha just takes over and it's this, that's good meditation. That's what meditation's for, at least at the beginning, is to get you to stop, and contemplate and see the mad mind as it does this blizzard state. So, I'm arguing a bit here that in meditation we see it, but in ordinary life we do not. We're always in a state of papancha, but we only see it when we still and quiet ourselves. When the eyes, ears, nose, tongue, and body come to a kind of quietness, do we see the mind doing this. When we uncross our legs and go about our ordinary affairs, on the other hand, we don't see it. That doesn't mean it's not working. It's not operative. It's interesting that there's a term called nipa pancha. Nipa pancha. Now, nipa is rooted in the word for nibbana or nirvana. And so that's a freedom from this. So the freedom from this diffuseness of mind is actually called nipa pancha. And the quote, this comes from the Dhammapada. It says, ordinary people delight in diffuseness in the world. The perfect ones are free of such diffuseness. There's another translation goes like this: there is no track in the sky. The recluse stays within the Buddha's path. Human beings delight in worldliness, but Buddhas are free from worldliness. So worldliness is now substituted for the term papancha, okay? And then there's another one, people delight in impediments, the Tathagatas are without impediments. So you see, there's a very useful method that you can use in translating these texts is, and I borrowed this from two colleague teachers of mine, Roger Ames and Henry Rosemont, who work almost exclusively with Chinese philosophy. And they came up with this idea called concept clusters. In other words, there's a series of 10, 15 terms that if you put them in a cluster are interrelated, but they don't mean exactly the same thing, but they all are used to describe a similar phenomenon. So in this case, if we took prapancha, you could use discrimination, you could use wangshang, false or wrong thinking, you could use the mad mind, you could use discursive consciousness. Conceptual proliferation is one of the terms that's used in a sort of abstract way. Impediments, Mind blizzard, that's a good one. Mind blizzard. Now again, being from California, you're saying, what's a blizzard? A blizzard is when snow comes down like rain, and it swirls around you. And you can actually get dizzy and disoriented in a blizzard. I grew up in blizzards, and I'm very careful when you go out in a blizzard, because not only does the snow impede your movements, but the swirling of the snow and the blizzard and the wind disorients you, and you can easily get lost. I told you the story of a farmer in our area who went out to the barn in a blizzard with his lantern to check on his cows, but when he came back, he got disoriented. He just wandered and wandered around trying to find the back door again. And finally they found him in the morning, frozen to death, 3 feet from his back door. In other words, the snow was blizzarding so much, it disoriented him so much, he was within 3 feet of coming home, but still couldn't see it and couldn't find it. Somehow, this one registers with me about living beings lost and confused wander through the long night of samsara, the mind in their blizzard and the blizzard outside, looking to return. Anyhow, dust fatigue, they all point to, and this is a very interesting definition, a distorted and distorting apprehension of reality. Distorted and distorting. It is distorting, it's a process of doing it, but the result is a distorted apprehension. So we are the makers of our own distortion through this distorting process. Where I want to go on this now is to go into this thing of description of the psychological distortion or distorting, the psychological papancha. What I'm saying is, unchecked, the more sophisticated we get with our inventive minds, our creative minds, so to speak, especially in the area of technology, the more this papancha slips over into the actual technological world that we create and live in. And it has a distorting and distorted result, if not balanced and seen through. You can use it, but you have to be very careful because it's a powerful proliferation mechanism. So I'm going to share a little bit with somebody who saw this. This was something my teacher talked about in the 1950s and early 1960s when he talked about technology, particularly in the media, television and computers, and gave a warning that the mind, the prapancha mind, if it doesn't cultivate, when it meets with these tools and devices, will be completely taken over by them and dehumanized without even knowing it. And that's something he wrote about in a thing called Water Mirror Reflecting Heaven, one of the few treatises that he ever wrote. Similarly, at the same time, there was a German philosopher, some of you know, Martin Heidegger, who also in 1955 became aware of this. Now, they didn't know each other. This is very interesting. One's in China, one's in Germany. I'm sure they never read each other's works nor never met. So why is it, you know, and they didn't Skype, they didn't Facebook, they didn't tweet, they didn't do a TikTok, they did none of that. And yet, very parallel almost, they're coming up with similar insights or warnings. Okay, so Heidegger in the 1950s did a work called The Question Concerning Technology. This was in 1955. Now you have to realize he's doing this in 1955 after witnessing the incredible uses and abuses of technology in 2 world wars. The First World War, where modern technology applied to weapons of destruction, was unbelievable. If you want to see a kind of rendering of this, you can watch the latest movie, All Quiet on the Western Front, which really portrays World War I. Out of World War II, you up the ante. Human beings become more advanced, more progressive in their experiments. And Master Wa's saying is they take humanity as a toy, as an experiment to work these devices on. So then you end up with chemical and nuclear weapons coming out of there. Heidegger, coming out of this in the 50s, started to see there was something wrong not just with the abuses of these technologies, and this is what I want to stress tonight, but actually the uses of it on humanity itself. In other words, the very incorporation of that particular mindset was as dangerous as the abuses that it could be turned to. So he's making a statement that is technology is not neutral. Technology has a formative and to some extent a possibly huge deformative effect on us that we don't realize. So he, and I'm going to sort of go through his thought a little, I'm trying to crystallize. Anybody who's read Heidegger knows that this is not an easy task to bring Heidegger down to a few paragraphs. Foolishly, I'm going to try that tonight on technology. But he sensed that all things are being swept up together in a vast network in which their only meaning lies in their being available to serve some end. We're becoming swept up in an energy where we see all things and we use all things, and their meaning lies not in something intrinsic, but in being available to serve some end that will itself also be directed toward getting everything under control. So this control obsession, and remember we talked about prapancha as an obsession, this obsession with getting control is what he's talking about. And he called it this gathering man to it, gathering the human to this idea. He calls it enframing, E-N-F-R-A-M-I-N-G, enframing, encircling and framing, almost as if we put on glasses of 360 degrees and we are now, through that framing, seeing ourselves in the world completely different. The image that came to mind when I read this, again, my niece showed me this. She likes the trilogy of the rings, right? You guys know about that? The Lord of the Rings, right? But there's that one scene where with the hero, what's his name, the little guy? Frodo is going back to take the ring back and throw it into the fire. By the way, I hadn't thought about it, but the ring represents Heidegger's view of enframing. It takes over you, remember? The ring itself and the power associated. Hey, this is really wonderful. Anyhow, that's not where I'm going. Where I'm going was, in part of his thing, he goes into this cave, and there's a huge spider in there. And the spider weaves him into a cocoon sort of thing, and he's stuck in there, he can't get out. This is a kind of a literary visceral idea of enframing. So in the same way Heidegger's arguing, we become enframed, encapsulated in this sticky mass. And he says, enframing he calls where people and things are ceaselessly like on an assembly line, taking their place arranged and ordered for use. For use. And you can see how this affects even our vision of education today. It's not for becoming a human. It's not for intrinsically its own worth. It's for use. What is it good for? What is it good for? And parents, unconsciously enframed in this consciousness, then push this on their children of saying, you should get a good education to get this money or position or power. What is it for? What is its use? Well, I'm going to do a meditation retreat. Well, what good is that? What is its use? It'll make you useless. Heidegger says, all that is, and man himself is being gripped in a structuring that enframes everything, energy, machines, and persons, leaving only skeletons of their being. I mean, this is very visceral, very, very direct. We're being enframed, but what it's doing is sucking out our very essence, and we don't realize it. In this work, The Question Concerning Technology, Heidegger saw every aspect of contemporary life, not only machine technology and science, but even art and religion and culture, exhibiting the symptoms or the clear marks of the ruling essence of technology. In other words, we are technologically technologizing everything, even our human relationships. So if you look at sort of what Avatar, what was that one that Zuckerberg just launched? Meta. Meta was an attempt, basically, to take the ruling essence of technology right into the human domain and substitute the human for this, the avatar. And this, he says, this enframing, this kind of technological consciousness holds sway in the dominion of man's self-consciousness. And then he quote, It seems that man everywhere and always only encounters himself. He is enframed within the ordering and objectifying of everything. So the essence of technology, he argues, is not simply the dominance of machine technology. That's not the only issue here, which everybody thinks about. Everybody says, oh, if we can just turn it to good use, technology is neutral, and so on and so forth. He's much more sophisticated. He's saying it's not just in the dominance of machine technology, but in the objectification of culture, life, history, and people themselves. A calculating and cataloging and disposing of all manner of things, this objectification. And technology is in no sense just an instrument of man's making or in his control. It is a fundamental making of man himself. This is really, really interesting. We become what we behold. We become what we invent. We invent these machines, and the machines then reinvent us. And he says, it sets upon everything. It's like a fog. It's like a mist that sets upon everything, imposing upon a demand that seizes and requisitions it for use. The line I really like here is from Frankenstein. How many people have read Frankenstein? 1, 2, 3, 4. Wow. A must read, okay? I highly recommend it. This is Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, not the Hollywood movie version. Anyhow, it's a caveat. It's a what you call a cautionary tale about the quest for power and immortality and dominance, and the machine and the instruments that you make to do that can turn around to control you. The famous line from that is he creates this creature. Now you know the Frankenstein creature, right? The movie, you've seen that. Yes? Creature, he takes body parts, puts them together, does a little electrical dose, and has this creature. The line in there is the creature at one point turns to him and says, "You are my creator, Dr. Frankenstein, but I am your master." And so he reverses and says, the instrument of our creation takes us. So under this dominion, Heidegger answers this, again, I'm saying this prapancha, okay, under that dominion of that, nothing is allowed to appear as it is in itself. Remember the distortion and distorting of things as they are, the Buddhist definition. Here he's saying the technological prapancha, which coming from that mind of prapancha, nothing is allowed to appear as it is. Man, in a sense, I'm quoting him, becomes the very machine consciousness he invented. Whoa. Assuming dominion over everything outside himself, objectifying and trying to control everything. All things, and here we go, even nature itself, cease to be anything other than objects, because their only important quality has become their readiness for use. And if you look at the environmental crisis we're facing today, and people think we're going to solve it with technological expertise, he would argue, no, you have to stop. You have to listen to nature, not try to control and dominate it. The return to nature is the only possibility we have for the restoration and reclamation of our nature. And if we simply extend the machine technology mind over nature, we'll be coming up with all these crazy devices and whatnot that seem to be solving the problem, but just deeper us into its hold. So I'll finish up with him. He calls this homogenizing. You all know what homogenizing is? Everybody knows homogenizing, right? You just blend everything together and make it one thing. That's what they do with a shake, milkshake. Okay. Homogenizing and reducing human experience to objects. And if you think about that, if you look at modern advertising, if you look at the proliferation that's out there, how much of the objectification is now the essence of things, even in warfare, even in the consideration of the people, come down to quantities, to numbers, not to real people. And as a result, we get a certain numbness. And that numbness is the technological objectification mindset that we get into. It turns the world into things and the consequent deformation of consciousness. So if you wanted to use what's another definition of prapancha, fangbian, deformation of consciousness. the loss, and this is Heidegger, of contemplative knowing. Woo, what a minute. 1955. We become users, consumers of things, only knowing the world and ourselves through this narrow crack. And we turn our innate wisdom into consciousness, and we turn our consciousness into an objectivation and proliferation of things. I mean, this is incredible. What he called for, really, he said, this again, 1955, we have to change from calculative thinking, that we're constantly calculating. The mathematization of nature is what Husserl called it. We have to change this mind of calculating and objectifying, and he used contemplative thinking. Whoa, contemplative thinking. He actually, now part of this was his own impulse to realize I have to myself stop thinking this way, because I have been a part of this. Heidegger realized that he had been a part of promoting a calculative thinking in his philosophy and his values. And he saw the results of this post-World War II. And he had the, whatever you want to call that, sensibility to see where this was going. Great sages and philosophers not only have a kind of a astute grasp of the present, but they have this ability to extrapolate and see where things are going. And he saw that unchecked, World War II and what it produced was only the beginning of a huge deterioration and deformation of human consciousness. So he came up, and that's when he started studying Taoist text. So at this point, we know he turned to a number of Taoist texts, and perhaps some Buddhist texts too, to come up with a model of what he called contemplative thinking, and not just calculative thinking. And what he said was, if we don't do this, we'll be unable to hear the call of the more primal truth, which he found in nature and then deeply in the human again. So then I'm going to go on, I'll finish it. He says this obliviousness that we have is the danger. I don't know how to describe it in Chinese or in Buddhism, it's called habituation. Habituation produces a behavior that's repetitive without thought, without reflection. It's self-generating. But as a result of that, we become oblivious to it. The expression is, you're in the fish market but no longer smell the fish. You're in the floral shop but can't smell the florals. You're in technology and controlled by it, but you think you're free. Because you're buying and choosing to buy a new device, you think you have consumer autonomy. But in fact, you're in the snare of this. So he's saying it summons and claims us. It summons, it beckons us, not with fear, but with fondness, with pleasure. And this ordering for use, the ordering for use, speaks to an all-encompassing purchase of human consciousness. It's being drawn into and constrained by itself, and this is the rule he calls of enframing. Drawn in and constrained by itself. So completely has the modern person been drawn into that dominion that he or she is actually cut off from awareness of their own essence or their own nature. Now we go back to the Platform Sutra, the Avatamsaka Sutra, Redwood Vihara. These places that we have, both the sutras that go back to this essence of the human and places that evoke it again, are essentially for this modern world. This is the stuff. If we don't have that, really, we're in deep doo-doo. As a consequence, this is very interesting how sharp he is, because we're cut off from our own essence, we become entrapped in one of two attitudes. This one really struck me. One, the person fancies he or she can master technology and by technological means analyze, calculate, and order, control all aspects of life. So one of the lures of the entrapment, of the enframing is, I will master this. Now, those of you know Frankenstein, that was it. I will create the creature. The other famous text in the Western tradition is Dr. Faustus. Dr. Faustus, who makes a deal with the devil. The devil says, I'll give you basically all the technological powers you want. One little price. What's that? Your soul. Oh, no problem. So he sells his soul to the devil for these powers, and the devil comes back to claim it. But why does he sell it? because he is so enamored and lusting over power and dominion and control. And so this idea is, when people say, don't worry, we'll come up with a technological solution. No matter what we have, we'll be able to control and change life, even to the point now where much money and technological energy is invested in elixirs of immortality, which it's not elixirs anymore, it's STEM technology that we are going to buy. And this is, again, we will have control and dominion. That's the first thing. I can control it, I will dominate it, I will harness it. The other is, person recoils, repulsed at the inexorable and dehumanizing control that technology is gaining over us. We're pissed off, we feel threatened. We don't like it. We want to go on cold turkey and pull ourselves away from this. It happens in some of our treats, right? People come in and I make, put your cell phone in the box. Okay, put it in the box for the 7 days. And then people go through withdrawal symptoms, but they realize they're addicted. And so they want to break out of this. They recoil at the inexorable and dehumanizing control that technology is gaining over us, rejects it as the work of the devil. This is Heidegger talking, and strives to discover for himself some other way to live life apart from it. Now this is where he says those are the two. And then Heidegger is really interesting. It's almost, he says, freedom, however, is in neither. Wait a minute. Freedom is no longer, it's not just thinking you can control and dominate it, nor reject it and throw away as the work of the devil. The freedom, he says, is in the opening of ourselves, submitting ourselves to attentive awareness. What? Sati. Samadhi. Attentive awareness. To something concealed. And then truth is the discovery, is the unconcealing of our true nature. I mean, you can't get more Buddhist than this. All beings have this nature, all can retain it. It's only because of false thinking, objectification, this entrapment, this enframing that we covered over. And so the freedom comes from opening ourselves, expanding and opening the heart and the mind to find that which is concealed or hidden. And then he says truth is the unconcealment, and that would restore our wholeness. And therefore he calls for there has to be a turning, not simply an evolving or a rejection, but a turning, and what he means is a returning. Remember the Tao Te Ching? In Tao, the only motion is returning to the concealed to bring it back again. And what does he call this? He calls it meditative openness thinking. Meditative openness thinking. He's calling it thinking yet. He's German. I mean, he's calling it, but he's saying openness meditation versus calculative thinking. Anyway, I think that if we look at all the stuff that's coming out now, and I would include in this AI, ChatGPT, all the proliferations of, and we haven't even begun to see where this is going. The next one will be clearly cyborg, in other words, biological, genetic implantations of chips and so forth into the human central nervous system. It'll be introduced first as a savior for paralysis and whatnot. And pretty soon it will become, we will become basically bots. Hume-bots, or bot-humes, or whatever, but would be a combination of robots and people. And this is exactly, I don't want to say exactly, but it was where Heidegger and Master Hua were watching it go. And even if we think we can control it, it's obvious that we can't, because one of the lessons of Frankenstein is you create these things, but they turn and actually not only control you, but destroy you. And you're not going to run away from it and pretend they don't exist. But that's not the case. So we have to take an alternative unconcealing of something. And that's where I feel, again, why a place like Redwood Bihar is very, very important, because you can go there and plug, immerse yourself in nature, and in that space of nature, recover or remember this concealed. So I'll read you an email from a former student. You don't have to guess who it is, but There was a conversation going on in the last, say, 5 or 6 weeks, both here at the monastery and then at the university, about the implications for this new technology. And again, people were going to either side. And people were either going like, well, we can control it, we can use it. And other people were going, no, it's a demon, the devil, we have to move away from it. But this is one email I got, so I'll read it to you. Personally, the mechanization of human cognition, even if it only kind of works, seems unstoppable as a capitalistic force, since there's so much potential money. Objectification. But it obscures its reliance on humans' intelligence and wisdom. I fear that a reliance and belief in the current approach to machine learning will lead to a collective diminishment in our belief and horizon of our own human potential and intellectual and moral capacity. Pretty well said. And then the last line, so maybe this is my long-winded way of saying the mission of DRBU is quite important. Good luck. We're going to need more than luck to pull this off. But you can see there is an understanding and a sensibility that this third option of returning and regrounding in the deepness of the human nature, unpolluted and undisturbed by this, neither rejection nor the illusion that we can overpower it, is the beginning of some kind of return. So I think what we have available to us is incredibly precious, even though it seems ancient and out of step with the modern times. It's exactly because it's that it's so important. Because for being in step with the modern time, there's no doubt about where this is going. And yet you can't stop it. So the most you can do is start to exercise a rehumanizing, centering over it. And it's not controlling it. It's knowing just because it can be doesn't mean it should be. That approach. So, anyhow, I'll pause. I want to do a poem. And again, for me, these poems from the Taoist Chan masters who spent their time deep in the forest speak to us in a poetic way about what Heidegger is warning about. So this poem tonight is from someone called Bo Chui. Anybody ever hear Bo Chui? He's around, how long ago was Bo Chui? Bo Chui was 700 to, say 770 to 850. Huh? Bai? Bo? There's different ways. Some people say Bai, some people say Bo. I'm telling you. What does that say? What does that say? Bo. It's Wei Giles, so it's Bo Chui. So this guy, the poet, Jerry E. We get caught up in his name and miss his message. That's wonderful. He comes from a poetic tradition. It's called, they sometimes use the word rivers and mountains, shui shan. But what Confucius said generally about poetry and about this is thoughts that are never twisty. It's a really interesting line, thoughts that are never twisty. And it means they have values and clarity and a depth of wisdom to them. And they're not just for virtuosity or for complex eloquence. So they're very simple language. He was a Chan cultivator. He sat, his sitting kind of gave a clarity and depth to his work and his life. And he found himself cultivating dhyana or Chan. And in that, just for a brief sort of layer overing, the self or the construction, this construction of a self, and all the things that are associated with the self are dissolved until only things as they are remain. So what Chan is doing is quieting the constructing, proliferating papancha mind. And when it quiets, things reveal themselves as they truly are. For him, he said it's like a bright mirror reflecting the world. It's both simple and complex and utterly sufficient when you get to that state. Yet, which is interesting, words, he said, are also constructions. So what was he going to do? And he said he admitted that, quote, his Chan failed as he could not subdue his poetry demon. So people who are writing papers for my classes say, I don't have a writing demon, how can I get one? But Han Shan De Cheng also talked about his writing poetry demon. So on the other hand, I want to say he's saying, oh, I got my poetry demon and that's why I write. On the other hand, I'm sort of thank you, that you have a little bit of a demon because we wouldn't have these poems unless you did. And then he said, his line was, after his realization of Chan in the mountains, he says, the simple heart is a full heart. The simple heart is a full heart, and a simple mind is the empty mind. So let me read you his poem. Very short. Sit through dusk beneath caves of pine. Sit through dusk, setting sun, through eaves of pine. Okay, the image, you get it right away. Have you seen tonight when the sun goes down and the sunlight filters through the pines? There's a kind of quiet that descends as that happens to you. Second line, at bamboo pavilion, sleep the night away. So there he is in the mountains. Everything settles down. And what the image you have here is all the lights go out. It's quiet. No screens, no electricity. This is a rhythm. Third line, or third verse. It's such empty clarity, like some drug. Isolate mystery deep as a mountain home. No cleverness can rival a simple mind. No busyness ever outshines idleness. Done struggling, done cultivating the way, here it is, this remote, dark enigma gate. So the remote, done struggling, done the busyness, doing the way, even cultivating the way now has become one with me. And then he says, here it is, remote, dark enigma gate. A metaphor for the mind itself. In other words, that how did he put it, the simple mind, empty mind, this is sometimes represented as dark, meaning both mysterious and hard to get a handle on. That's the poem for tonight, to counteract. I thought of a folk song from the 50s. Actually, I heard my grandmother sing it for some reason. But the line went like this. I used to search for happiness. I used to follow pleasure. But I found a door behind my mind, and that's the greatest treasure. The dark enigma gate matches this poem. I used to search for happiness. I used to follow pleasure. I won't sing it for you. You'd be... Well, it goes, I used to search for happiness. I used to follow pleasure. But I found a gate behind my mind, and that's the greatest treasure. There it is. So that's it for tonight. I ruined it with my singing, but at least you got to get the rhythm of that. Who's it by? I'll see if I can find it, because it was, I'd like to say my grandmother, but I know she didn't, she didn't write it. Yeah, it's from something called the October Song. Yep. Yeah, it's one of my favorite, but I won't sing it for you with my guitar, so you just get one little verse.
Where's change our cameras? Log? Okay, great.
Don't you want this?
We have another one here.
Oh, wow. Proliferation.
Proliferation, advance of technology. Today I want to share a little story in the reflections. Jin Chuan mentioned that a month ago, I think, we returned from India, what was a very transformative trip. We spent a few weeks in Ahmedabad and a few other places and have a chance to stay with the local communities, mainly service space. And it's the places when Marty talked about technologies, advances, what we have right now, for me was the places when we really see humaneness and really see the kind of living humans oasis, I can say. Jinchwasher says a week ago about Jayesh Bai, what is a very inspiring man, this kind of embodiment, compassion, but equally inspiring is his wife, Anar. She's, we can call activist, in the service-based language is heartivist, they call. And what she does, she do a lot of things, but one of the very important, what she cares is helping women. And especially those who are unprivileged, coming from difficult social or economical circumstances. And we once visited the place where they call Craft Roots. It's like 2 stores, big building, when the women's mainly, but also we can find some men's, are cultivating art, kind of handcraft. A lot of different styles of making beautiful artifacts from the fabrics, from the clay, really amazing, kind of very vibrant place. And what's very struck me, and I talked with one of the guides who we took a tour with whole group and have a chance to speak to all the artisans. And his name is Kaplan, and he told me about the philosophy behind what they do in the craft roots, the handcrafts. So the first he says that it's beyond the products, what they do. He says because every creation has the love, passion, and patience of a creator. And it's very important is they do in slow. The slowness is very essential. And he says that Indian very celebrate slowness, in the cooking, in the sewing, weaving, and so forth. So this is how the consciousness is engaged, so different than the massive technological advances. Everything have to be very fast and sufficient. And he says that in the large industries, someone who produce the goods is called a worker or labor. He says in the handcrafts, every creator is dignified as artisans, as artists. And in the handcrafts, let me see again. In the handcrafts handcrafts are not mass production. It's the labor of love created by masses. That we say is a very interesting way how he frame that this is the massive movement of people who do very kind of caring way of carrying the tradition and use the art as a form of therapeutic transformation, what they do. And it's interesting that also the element of imperfection. It mentioned that if the art is perfect, it's not called art. Because the human touch of every product have some simple element of imperfection. And it has a beautiful story of the one person who was working, I think was sewing machine, I'm not sure, and has electric problems that look a little bit electric shocking, so have to be grounded and fixed. But until they want to fix the machine, they call the artists to wear the shoes to prevent from any electrical, how they call, shocked. And the next day, someone came and see this, I think probably a woman, was sitting there and that didn't work. why you don't work? You have to make your living, and this, you have to use your time sufficiently here, maybe. And he says, no, I cannot work. This is a sacred space. I cannot work with shoes on. I always take out the shoes and work with the machine, and the sewing machine. And for her, it was a sacred act of something bigger than just a product. And for me, it was like, wow, this is really something deeply touching, that this is the whole movement which support and cultivate this, using the human consciousness and skills in a very transformative way, and giving the dignity to women and everyone who creating these arts, and not just create a space for transformation for those who involve in these art projects, but as well as us who came and be in contact with these people, with whatever they created. We also become a co-creator, kind of transform by their dedication and love, what is very kind of inspiring and beautiful to watch. I want to share from our Indian trip. So crafts roots. If you go to Ahmedabad, highly recommend to visit the place. Okay. Announcements, yeah. So tomorrow, Rabbi Heng Sure will lecturing on Avatamsaka Sutra, 7:30, like every week. Also Sunday, he do online Avatamsaka lecture. Do we have anything, Jin Chuansher, an upcoming? Yeah, so the regular is 4 a.m. We have morning ceremony. We have 12:30, 30 minutes of Amitabha recitation. And 6:30, we have an evening ceremony every day. And Thursday and Friday, we are open for meditation in person at 6:15 in the morning and 5:15 p.m. So if you wish, please join us.
We were going to have a what we call a CEI, a contemplative exercise immersion. This time it was going to be completely in juxtaposition to what I was talking about tonight in framing. So it was going to be an immersion in nature with poetry and exercises outside, Tai Chi and so forth. And of course, all of this depended on nature smiling on us. But as yet, nature hasn't broken a crack of a smile. Raining and snowy and cold. So in Wisconsin, that's okay. I mean, that's what you do. But in California, I noticed we had a little gathering. It was inside, and the windows were kind of open. This was last week. So it was inside, like this room. And most of the people, it looked like a ski chalet. I mean, everyone was dressed up in warm down jackets and whatnot. I thought, okay, so if this is what they're doing inside, if we go outside, it'll be completely traumatic. So we postponed it until perhaps spring or maybe in the fall we'll do it again. But we're trying to do a series of immersion type exercises where we pull off from technology completely and go into physical body movement cultivation and then contemplation in nature. So it's coming as soon as nature allows.
Okay, great. So can transfer merit. May every living beings, our minds as one and radiant with light, share the fruits of peace with hearts of goodness, luminous and bright. If people hear and see how hands and hearts can find in giving unity, may our minds awake to great compassion, wisdom, and to joy. May kindness find reward. May all sorrow leave their grief and pain. May this boundless light dispel the darkness of our endless night. Because our hearts are one, this world of pain turns into paradise. May all become compassionate and wise. May all become compassionate and wise. 3 bows. Bowing respect to the triple jewels.